Hello, I'm a nostalgic. Oh wait, no, wrong, wrong channel. Well, this is awkward. Roll an intro.
DJ Tenebroso.
Naofumi was always considered a rather intelligent individual. He was a rather charismatic fellow as well, who also aced pretty much all of his classes. Eventually, the fruits of his labor they would show when he got accepted into University of Oxford for a biology major. Yeah, the classes they were rigorous, but he enjoyed the programs that the school offered when it came onto his major. He never regretted it whatsoever. He was glad to have been accepted into such a prestigious school, and he was basically being allowed to study what his passion really was biology. He would notice a strange looking fruit one day, though, while he was pulling an all nighter, you see. He was doing some research on a special type of organism in his school laboratory, and he decided to take a break. A bit of a breather, you could say. And that's when you notice that strange looking fruit. For some reason, it was there, and he didn't recall seeing that fruit before either. It just seemingly randomly spawned there, or maybe somebody placed it there while he was so heavily focused on the research. He wasn't exactly sure which was the actual case. Well, it was probably more likely that somebody had placed it there and he just never noticed. His stomach it did growl though, and he would look at the peculiar fruit once more, and against his better judgment, he would decide to take a bite out of the fruit, only for it to have a revolting taste, you see. He would try to leave the laboratory only for a bright light to flash, blinding him for a bit. The main reason why he was trying to leave the laboratory as well was, of course, to wash his mouth out of that filthy taste that was left. But he would not get that chance. Instead, that bright flashing light would blind him, and when the light finally died down and he was able to open his eyes up again, he would find himself in a completely new environment with there being three other guys with him as well. While looking around, it actually seemed as if he was in some sort of medieval setting. A couple of older men they would begin to beg for Naofumi and the other three guys next to him to actually save them from the waves or something along those lines. Those words confused Naofumi though. He had no idea where he was, and now there were these strange old guys talking about saving them from waves? Like tsunamis? He wasn't exactly sure what they meant. He noticed that the three guys that were with him all held weapons of some sort, but also had confused looks on their faces. One had a spear, another they had a sword, and the last one had a bow. He didn't necessarily know what these weapons meant, but when Naofumi looked down at his own arm, he realized that he had a shield for some reason. This left him scratching his head though. How was a shield, of all things, a weapon? I mean, he supposed he could probably use it like Captain America's shield at best. But even then, it seemed like those other 3 weapons would have been a whole lot more useful. He didn't have much time to ponder though, because the other boys, they were going on to actually argue with the summoners before a couple of guards would enter the room. Apparently the king, there was a king? Yeah, apparently this king fellow had requested their presence. The king explained that the whole ordeal with the waves was basically this and that. I'm not even gonna bore you with the details at this point. Yeah, they showed little to no regard for Naofumi during the whole explanation process though. You know, about the waves being some sort of trials or something along these lines. Basically a catastrophe of sorts where monsters would fall down from the sky and attack villagers and all that. And then when the king asks for the names of each of these mighty men, brave fellows, brave warriors to be, he just entirely skipped Naofumi, and the other 3 had to basically call the king out for that. Naofumi would just be left to try and process all of this information, but also be forced to digest the fact that he and the other apparent heroes all came from parallel versions of Earth when they went to like a sort of dorm or like an inn or something along these lines. Basically a room for them all to share for the night. And they would have gotten to basically talking about this system and all of that, comparing it to different video games. Now for me, wasn't really a video game fellow. He was very much out of the loop when it came onto the system of this world, since, well, he had invested so much of his time and effort into his education that he just really never had any time to play video games. It was pretty much all work and no fun for him since he was a young kid. He was so pressed on being a scholar that, well, he was left at a disadvantage here. It became apparent the very next day though, when no one wished to join his party, except for, well, one girl who was originally part of another hero's party. I believe the Spear Heroes party, or Motoyasu's party. The only reason that she joined him though was purely out of pity for him though. He didn't like it. It was honestly pretty embarrassing, but he didn't really have that much of a choice in the matter. But things could only go downhill from here, and that was exactly what happened. You see, it turned out that the girl was a snake. Yeah. Having him, waste most of his money on her equipment and the little money that he had for himself. Yeah, that was used to buy some armor and rent out 2 rooms at an inn for the night. But, you see, she then went on to accuse him of basically forcing himself upon her, and, he also found out that she had stolen his armor too, giving it to Motoyasu. Naturally, he was beyond livid at this point. You see, Naofumi, he kinda hated this world now. He was willing to give the world a chance at first, but now he realized that he had basically been stripped of everything in just a matter of days. He had a scholarship for the University of Oxford. He was doing research studies. He was going to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, maybe that last one was an exaggeration, but he was going to be making news articles with his latest new studies, his research on like these special organisms. He was going to be famous. He was going to be a famous scientist, biologist, any sort of thing. He was going to make a name for himself in the world. And then all of a sudden he gets transported to this world where he is just treated like dirt for some reason. even though he was teleported here as somebody that's meant to protect their world. He didn't understand these people whatsoever. And then because of the fact that he's a guy and she's a girl, they automatically believe the girl over him. They wouldn't even give him a chance to even speak his mind. They would not give him any time to speak. They just immediately shamed him. They immediately called him a criminal. They did not give him any fair trial whatsoever, and he was sick of it. All of a sudden, he would see an alert pop up in his menu. Something about using the abilities of the Mori Mori no Mi. What was that? He didn't know what that meant, but he didn't really care. He still decided to use it regardless in this moment. And boom. His arms, they would suddenly turn into wooden roots, wrapping around several guards. Everyone, including Naofumi, would be surprised seeing this, but Naofumi was not complaining in this moment. No, he would actually smirk at this pleasant surprise before crossing his arms and flinging the guards all across the room. Most slammed into the walls, while some managed to get lucky, but just hitting the floor. King Oldcray would quickly recover from this momentary shock, though, and demand that Naofumi leave his kingdom immediately. Naofumi would simply flick the king off and leave without another word. He just had to use these abilities in order to become stronger and fend off against the waves. That was all. It wasn't like he was being left with nothing. No. Naofumi had power in this world. At least he could do something with this. In comparison to when he just had the shield. At first he thought he just had his shield and nothing more. How was he going to defend himself? How was he going to attack? How was he going to build up his strength? But this, he could work with this. His reputation, yeah, it had been ruined. It had basically been dragged all across the dirt, the mud, and basically one night. So he didn't really have to act nice anymore. Instead, he just immediately hit the fields, morphing his arms into wooden stakes, impaling several orange balloon monsters, and he would level up a fair bit before noticing that he wasn't really getting anywhere after reaching a certain level. He was just wasting his time at this point, so he would go on to deal with bigger and stronger monsters. He would level up quite a bit though. At times, the monsters, they would just be too tough for him to handle easily though. He would take damage quite a bit actually, but he would discover something amazing in one of his battles. Though he already had a high defense from being the shield hero, Naofumi found that he could also regenerate. You see, he remembered discovering this when a monster managed to bite off his arm. He was in excruciating pain, but he could still feel the bitten off part of his arm. He would call for it, and suddenly, roots would shoot out of the stump and attach to the dismembered arm, gluing themselves back together. Knowing this made Naofumi somewhat cocky in his battles against monsters after that, since injuries were no longer that big of a concern for him. He could always just heal from it. As long as he had enough energy, that is. He also used his biology major in order to realize the greater potential of his powers. Parasitic plants existed in nature, so it wasn't a stretch to believe that he could also drain the energy from other creatures. He would test this theory out with a large bear-like creature. Rather than fighting the monster though, Naofumi would simply wrap his roots around the creature with the intent to steal their nutrients. Suddenly, they began to look a bit thin and less ferocious to Naofumi. His stats were also going up. Naofumi gave a toothy smile seeing this. He felt stronger when he was done with the creature. He could get used to this method of becoming stronger actually. He would carry the corpse with him to sell at a local market afterwards. He hadn't really found the need for money after discovering his plant powers. After all, one of the very first things Naofumi had done was create a shelter for himself to, well, protect him from the elements, and he also produced fruits and vegetables to consume as well. So it wasn't like he was in need of food either. He could also regenerate from fatal wounds, so there was no real need for armor either. Sure, he looked kinda disheveled after a while, but he didn't really care that much about his appearance anymore. He looked practically unrecognizable to most. His hair had become long and shaggy, and he was growing some facial hair too. He honestly just wanted to well celebrate his latest life-altering achievement by dining in for once, which was why he went on to sell the corpse of the bear. He made a fair amount of money off of the bear and was on his way to a diner. While on his way though, he would encounter a shady-looking man though, who would offer him a chance at having a party member who, well, would never disobey him. He was a cardinal hero after all, and all cardinal heroes needed companions of some sort. Without one, well, there would be a good chance he could lose his sanity from the waves to come and the pure solitude he would feel after a while. The man's words sounded fairly convincing to Naofumi, so he decided to take up the man's offer of at least looking around his shop, only to realize it was full of slaves. Yeah, he would sympathize with one in particular, that being a raccoon girl that looked rather sickly. Naofumi would insist on buying this raccoon girl specifically. The slave trader could not refuse, although he would mention that there were a lot of other options that Naofumi could choose from. But if the boy insisted, then who was he to deny him? So he would put a slave crest on the girl in order to make sure that she obeyed Naofumi's orders through and through after Naofumi had finished paying for her. Naofumi would stick with Raftalia, but he did have plans to purchase more slaves in the future so we could get them out of that terrible situation. He would do his best to come up with some herbs that could act as medicine for the girl. When applying them to his shield, they seemed to merge together and produce proper medicine for the girl, something that he highly appreciated. There seemed to be more use to this shield than he once thought. He wondered what else he could apply to the shield actually and what each result would be. He would leave that curiosity for later though. For now, he would use medicine to help Raftalia recover. He'd also create a weapon for the girl to wield. Sure, it was just a wooden spear for now, but it would work. They would upgrade her equipment all in due time when they stocked up on more money, that is. Naofumi would watch over Raftalia's condition for now, watching as she gradually improved. When he realized that she was strong enough, he would have her fight alongside him in some of his battles. It was hard for her to fight at first, and she was traumatized after the first sight of blood, but Naofumi did his best to help her through her panic attacks. The two would eventually find themselves visiting a village by the name of, well, Loot Village. They were hoping to sell some of their monster pelts since they made a fairly good living off of just that, but the offers, they were rather low in comparison to what they were used to. Naofumi would find out that the village had been affected by a wave previously, and because of the wave, they prioritized ores more. Said ores could be found in their coal mine, but the merchant would warn Naofumi though that it was dangerous in the caverns. Naofumi would take heed and he would enter the caverns cautiously. Naofumi would have been easily able to take the monster down, but he noticed something off about Raftalia. He had worked with her to get through her past traumas for a while now, but this one seemed to be a deep-rooted one for her. He realized that he couldn't afford for her to just freeze up like this whenever certain monsters like this popped up. He knew this would be rather harsh, but it was either he forced her to get past her trauma, or she died in battle one day. He'd grown to have a bit of a bond with the girl, so he naturally didn't want to go with the latter. Naofumi would push for Raftalia to take a stand for herself here. He would even use the slave crest to force her to take action and pained him to use the slave crest like this, knowing it hurt her every time that she disobeyed, but it was necessary here. Raftalia and Naofumi, they would tag team the monster, eventually encasing them in Naofumi's fruits, and Raftalia, she would be the one to deal the finishing blow to the monster, though her wooden spear ended up snapping in half right after. Naofumi? Honestly, he was not particularly surprised whatsoever. Yeah, he had been meaning to update the equipment for a while now. This just gave them even more reason to do so. Naofumi would apologize to Raftalia afterwards, though, before explaining how he couldn't afford for her to freeze up. He couldn't afford to lose her. In the upcoming waves, there was a good chance that she could get killed if she were to freeze up like that again. Raftalia understood where Naofumi was coming from, and she would forgive him. After all, it was his way of showing tough love. A week would have passed since then, and the two would have headed off to a local weapon shop back in Castletown. He recognized that the equipment there was of a rather good value in comparison to the others that he visited during this time. None of them really compared to Earhart's shop. The shop owner wouldn't have recognized Naofumi at first, due to his more rugged look, but he would immediately become hostile when noticing the shield. Only one person ever had that shield after all. He tried to attack Naofumi out of anger because of the charges against the young adult, but Naofumi would easily pin him down. Earhart would be surprised to see several roots wrap around him, and Naofumi's arm suddenly becoming wood itself. Earhart would struggle out other restraints, but he would find out that these roots were incredibly tough actually. He'd eventually stop resisting and ask Naofumi if it was true. Were the allegations against him true? Naofumi would remain silent for a second before walking up to Earhart, looking him directly in the eyes for emphasis. Just from his eyes alone, Earhart knew that the boy was innocent. Naofumi knew this too, but he would make it verbally clear that he did nothing to mine. No, she was just a snake, a Jezebel. If y'all know what that is, whatever. Naofumi would release Earhart from his restraints afterwards and show a desire to buy some equipment from the man. He would hand Earhart a lump sum of money too. He apparently needed a new weapon and armor for Raftalia. Armor wasn't that big of an issue for Naofumi considering how he could regenerate and all, but having a bit of armor didn't hurt anyone, even if you could regenerate. Could probably come in handy for desperate situations probably. He would make a custom order using some of the spare ores he had on him, alongside some monster pelts. I don't know why that one was so hard to say. Some of the hides for some of the monsters were rather tough, so he was hoping that they could boost the defense of his future armor as well. Naofumi ended up buying a two-sided spear for Raftalia with magic iron encoded in it, and he would pick up his custom order the very next day as well. Afterwards, they would head off to the Dragon Hourglass after Earhart told them about how to check how much time they had before the next wave. There, they would witness a shield react to the clock and suddenly display the amount of time that they had left. The amount of time being minutes. Not hours, not days, minutes. Gloom immediately hit Naofumi after realizing this. Were they ready? He wasn't sure. The rest of the heroes, they would have arrived not too long after Naofumi though, and Motoyasu would immediately mock Naofumi's appearance, mentioning how he looked homeless. Naofumi would growl before beginning to morph into his plant element. Motoyasu would tisk before getting on guard himself. The other two heroes would try to defuse the situation the best that they could. Motoyasu, when seeing Raftalia, would also try to flirt with her. And although Naofumi still saw her as a 10-year-old, it was obvious to pretty much everyone else in the room that she had grown quite a bit. She had gone through quite a bit of a physical development, and this was also their first time even meeting Raftalia as well, so they had no idea what she had looked like when she was a kid either. Motoyasu only saw a pretty lady in front of him that he was willing to shoot a shot at. Yeah, this only aggravated Naofumi more. He would push the other heroes out of the way and shoot several vines at Motoyasu, dragging him over to where he was standing. Raftalia would try and bring Naofumi back down to earth though, and try and bring him back to his senses by explaining that he was better than this. Naofumi, hearing this, would actually release his restraints on Motoyasu before storming out with Raftalia following behind. Motoyasu had to admit that he was a bit shaken up from, well, that attack. He had tried to even, break away from the restraints, but these vines, they were incredibly tough for some reason. He was probably never going to admit that out loud though. As for Naofumi though, yeah, he would do his best to calm himself down by sprouting a couple pieces of plant life, including a large oak tree in the middle of the city. He would use the tree as a form of shade as well, while he waited the time out for the wave to appear. Once the countdown reached 0, he and Raftalia would immediately be sent to what looked like a war zone, while the other three heroes immediately went to deal with a boss monster. Raftalia and Naofumi, they would decide to deal with the monsters in neighboring villages. The first one on their list was Loot Village. Naofumi knew quite a bit about plant life thanks to his major in college, so he would attempt something here. He could already drain the nutrients from living creatures, so would it really be that much of a stretch to go further with the parasitic plant life? Being able to control the minds of some of the monsters via plant life, or maybe even create fumes from mushrooms or something that caused hallucinations for the monsters too? He wasn't sure, but it was worth a shot. He and Raftalia would run through many of the monsters, but for the ones that they missed in the first go, Naofumi would shoot spores at them that had parasitic plant life which controlled their actions, and all of a sudden these monsters would begin to fight each other and the unaffected monsters as well, creating disorder among their groups. Raftalia would simply stab through each and every last one of them, while Naofumi He would attain and squeeze to death all of those that remained even after that. They would have made quick work of all of these monsters, and this wouldn't stop the Royal Knights though from shooting fire at Loot Village under the belief that there were still monsters out there in the village. This would have set Naofumi greatly since he didn't even check first or help him fight out the monsters before immediately choosing to go with, very drastic measures, practically burning a whole city down. Or not city, a whole village down just to get rid of some monsters. They were doing more damage than good at this point. He would create a giant barrier made of fire-resistant wood and shout at the knights afterwards. How incompetent was this kingdom, for crying out loud? Naofumi remained in Loot Village in order to do damage control from there. Eventually, the other three heroes would have defeated the boss, and the wave would have ended from there. Everyone would celebrate after having survived the wave, and the casualties had been minimized this time around. Naofumi would hear about there apparently being a party of sorts happening to celebrate their heroes, and he was apparently invited for some reason. He found this to be a bit suspicious though. He heard that they were giving the heroes rewards, but Naofumi, he didn't care about money. He could make enough on his own, for crying out loud. He even discovered that he didn't even really need to eat because of his plant-like physiology. Photosynthesis was enough for him to survive, so all he really needed was a glass of water. He was like Piccolo, for crying out loud. He just ate for the sake of it, so it wasn't like he needed money for food. Maybe for Raftalia, but even then, she did well on a plant-based diet alone. They added meat in the form of fish and monsters they hunted though. Even living spaces. Naofumi could just create from scratch, so all they really needed to buy was equipment 90% of the time. The two of them would instead prioritize repairing Loot Village. Naofumi would produce fruits and vegetables alongside several pieces of wood for the villagers. Naofumi would also purchase a new member to his team from the slave trader during this time as well, in the form of a fox girl by the name of Kunoi. She was already a fully grown adult too, so she was in her prime for fighting. And Naofumi, yeah, he just decided to give her an axe to help with chopping wood though, and helping out the villagers, which surprised the girl. You see, she was expecting to be treated horribly, but all she had to do was some manual labor alongside some happy villagers, and she was cared for in return. Shoot, this is practically like paradise in comparison to when she was cooped up in them cages. Yeah, even her original life before she was being held captive by a slave trader. It was not nearly as easy as this. She got clothes, a roof over her head, and food. Come on, she's living a good life, man. Yeah, one day though, Motoyasu, he would arrive to the village though with Mine. Mine would declare that Motoyasu was officially the new lord of this village, and most of the villagers would ignore this though, being too busy repairing their village now. Some were on break and chatting with each other while having coffee from the coffee beans Naofumi provided. They viewed it as an elixir of sorts that Naofumi created in order to give them a boost in energy and productivity, which wasn't completely wrong. Mine would grow annoyed seeing how nonchalant the people were, and would go on to list off the new developments for this village while under Motoyasu's control. One of these updates would be the new taxing system. Many, when hearing this, would find that the taxes were outrageous, and even Naofumi would step up in defense of the villagers when hearing how much they were being taxed. He was convinced that Motoyasu didn't know how the money in this world worked if he was trying to tax them so much. Mine would come to Motoyasu's defense though by bringing up how he had no room to really talk right now. Many villagers would voice their opinions though, but mine would demand silence from them all. Naofumi would transform into his low-gear form, looking like an entire forest at this point. Motoyasu had never seen Naofumi in his full low-gear state. He had only ever seen him partially transform into it, and seeing him in his full state, he had to admit, it kinda scared him a bit. It left fear in the hearts of some of the knights, and even Motoyasu would take a step back, seeing how intimidating Naofumi looked, but he would do his best to stand his ground. He feigned a brave face, and mine would bring up how Naofumi still couldn't do anything since the king had appointed Motoyasu as the lord of this village, and that was law. Right as she said that though, a shadow appeared with a note in hand for her. After reading it, mine would crumble the paper in anger. She would honestly just propose an idea to Naofumi afterwards. If he really cared for this village that much, then he should fight for it. Yeah, fight for it, bro. A fight between the spear hero and shield hero to see who would have the rights to being the lord of this village. If Naofumi lost, well, he would also be forced to relinquish the 2 slaves that he had in his party. Hearing that he had slaves, Motoyasu, he would become outraged, having even more motivation to win this duel. Naofumi would transform back into his human form, and he would agree to this fight. And that fight will be for next part. You guys already know the deal. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you've been rocking my content for a little while, maybe hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, talk about how you like the video, maybe some things I could work on. Oh, and be sure to check out Neptune as well. Check out their stories on Wattpad, because they helped me like with planning out the story as well, this what if, you know. But yeah, that's all I have to really say. Time Planet is your boy King Time, next thing out. Peace.